Welcome to the UnStruktured podcast. This week I talk with fellow performance design leader Elisabeth McGarry. Based in Boston, Elisabeth has spent the past 2 decades creating collections for iconic brands like Nike and Reebok and has led design for some of the most talked about startups in the performance and outdoor industry. From her early experience with coveted design labels in Antwerp, Belgium, to adopting her first son to become a single working mother at the age of 23, Elisabeth has built a professional, creative life rooted in the mantra family first, naming her design studio MCGARRY&Sons. I'm Michelle Rose, and this is UnStruktured. This episode of UnStruktured is brought to you by Schoeller, the global textile company headquartered in Switzerland, specializing in the development and manufacturing of high-performance fabric and textile technologies for athletic, outdoor, fashion, and workwear categories. Founded more than 150 years ago, Schoeller calls upon its vast history of experience working with the most advanced equipment in compliance with the world's toughest environmental systems. Quality and sustainability have always served as the brand's core principles, with the entire production chain, from raw materials to the finished product, intensely scrutinized. For more information, visit www.schoeller-textiles.com.
I really loved your focus on it's like this comment about shifting culture. I'm like, oh my God, what was I talking about? But it got me thinking a lot about how much that does mean to me and how it really has been such a motivator and a catalyst for me doing what I'm doing. So I really appreciate you slowing me down to talk about it. Listening to your past episodes, I'm just like so craving these deeper, longer conversations on these topics that we're all swirling in it, right? And having that platform. And I know you and JJ were talking about like, what's the community aspect of this, in addition to the one-on-one conversations. And I just get really excited at that prospect.
But yeah, I wanted to put the focus of this episode on that shifting culture because that's what we're going through. But also, I feel that is something. It feels very important to me. It felt very important to you, and in our work and how we integrate it with family and our daily lives, and also our value systems. And what we operate from. And I found myself feeling, ever since we've met, a kindredness with you as a fellow artist and designer and as a mom, in how we work and go through struggles. Like hearing some of your struggles really resonate with me, and I know they resonate with a lot of the design community. It's like we want to make a positive impact in the world. We really do, but we want to also stay close and remain really connected to the people that we love and that we're caring for, and how to kind of expand big and stay home and close and connected. Huge struggle. And I know it is for you, but you've made it work better than so many people. And that just shows how hard it is. Right.
Like, am I making it work?
Right. I know.
We probably all do that game, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I ask myself that all the time too. And, a lot of ups and downs with that. But, it's like, I think it's very much reflected in your personal and your professional story, which I said a slash because they aren't separate. Let's slash in my notes here, and I think it's really reflected in the name of your business. McGarry&Sons, which I know the story, but I would love to just quickly have you explain that to our audience, if you would, please.
Sure. It's kind of cheeky. That when I first started freelancing, it was really at a turning point in my life. I had just given birth to my youngest son and made a decision not to take a job that was waiting for me. And that was scary. That was terrifying. And it took a lot of me working with my mentors and gut checking. It just felt right to stay home and experience that that early, precious, fleeting moment of motherhood.
Yeah.
But I was so worried. I mean, I was 29 and I thought that if you take a break from the industry, you're going to become irrelevant as a designer. There's just a lot of stigma and stress and pressure around that.
Yeah, completely.
And so, but I did it. I did it with a lot of support and encouragement, and it ended up just being the right thing for me. It opened the door into freelancing. People kind of heard I was this free agent, and I was literally just sneaking in work between nap times and breastfeeding and the occasional shower that I might give myself. And I was taking meetings at coffee shops. Sometimes I had a babysitter and sometimes I didn't, and so I had these like boys in tow with me, and it really literally was a joke. It was like, welcome to MCGARRY&Sons. We're going to have a meeting, a design review, or a strategy session on my dining room, at my dining room table while the baby was asleep. We've got 65 minutes. Let's go. So, however, when my husband and I really talked about the business was great. I was busy. I was bringing in collaborators and people from my past who I loved working with and building these mini teams for these projects. And MCGARRY&Sons just kind of stuck, and it extended beyond myself and my family to the way that we work. And we thought it feels really old timey and old fashioned and a little traditional, but I think that there is an essence of that in the way in which we work, which is sort of counter to maybe what I should be presenting, which is like forward thinking, innovative studio, which we also are. But I think at the end of the day, we really come together as family. We treat our clients and our collaborators as family, and so it's just stuck.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that really draws me in the most about that. I mean, it's clear from your story that we'll go into that you're so rooted in that family first, as we've talked about, and that really early on. I mean, this is quite a while ago you started this. This is trailblazing of here's who I am, take it or leave it. This is what you're getting, and I'm not making any apologies about it. Because that's what a lot of people have had to do, hide it, and to put it out there, I think just really pushes it forward and gives it some power. So I'm really inspired by that piece. Yeah. And when we were talking about, I don't know, in our last conversation, we were talking about shifting culture. I mean, my notes said that, and I was like, yes, that really hit with me. And then I was trying to really remember what it was we were talking about that got to that point. But the thing that I wrote down was you talked about shifting culture because it needed to, it had to shift. And I wanted to know, what did you mean by that?
I think that we were speaking about the future of design and design talent. It's something I'm really passionate about. I'm feeling this separation between, especially the larger brands and corporate culture, kind of not having maybe the skill set to really nurture and hone young creative talent. And that is a huge miss. And so I think what I was referring to was the culture that is driving these big brands, big players have so much power, so much influence to do right in the world. And many have made their claims that they will, and they're working towards more responsibility and everything else. But I'm working with some of these clients as well, and just sort of seeing how maybe that leadership style isn't shifting as quickly and keeping up with what young design talent needs in order to stay motivated and engaged in that kind of environment. And we need that because those are the future leaders of these big organizations. So I think that that's what I was referring to, and I so wholeheartedly feel that way.
It has to, and that's a conversation I feel like we've had a few times in the times that we've talked. Is just that missing guidance and creative leadership that needs to happen. Um, you were also talking about mass consumption, politics, polarization, and stuff. The other things that need to shift that exist, within these companies as well. So there's a whole big sense of companies themselves are going through a massive shift and they don't know how to do it. I think in a lot of ways we have a really strong sense of what needs to shift. We just don't know how to do it, en masse on the bigger sense. So
Yeah.
what does that term culture mean to you? That word is so it means different things to different people.
It's loaded, right?
Yeah, totally.
I know. I'm sort of laughing. I'm like, okay, so my sociology friend is going to be like just curling their toes hearing me describe what culture means. But I think that there's the big, broad sense of culture, the language you speak, the food you eat, the music, tradition. A lot of that steeped in tradition and carried on for generations. And then there's the cultural current, I think, that shifts with the times. And when you feel a part of something or you don't feel a part of the loudest voice in the room, then you start to get these little bands, right?
Right.
And subcultures emerge. And
Right.
I think that as a designer and a creative and working with other designers and creatives, that's really where the change comes from, right? And it is our job to amplify the subcultural shifts and movements and find ways to infuse them in our work, regardless of the scale of the project, without poaching anything that doesn't belong to you or anything like that. There's obviously a lot of sensitivity that needs to come from from that as well. But I think when you that's why collaboration to me is just so crucial. You bring in the right people who come from these places and it's just going to naturally occur. And that's how you open doors and open people's minds and hearts to a shift and change and thinking. So
yeah, it's part of the kind of global learning how to get along with everybody as well as we integrate a lot more. But I love what you said about that, the subcultures, because that is a place that artists and designers and creative minds, we are so drawn to the subcultures, in general, and those fringes and those new things and those odd little things bubbling up. That's where so many of us come from. And that's where we feel at home. And we often have more connection to those than the, general population. And yeah, the new ideas I've always been drawn to them since I was a kid. I think I was born into it. So it's just natural for me to just exist there. And one subculture that, like, I grew up in the music scene. My father also played music in the Bay Area. My mom was part of that, an artist and whatnot. And then I grew up, found myself into the punk rock scene. And then from there, found myself in a martial arts community. And that was more for, needing to, I don't know, I guess it was like, healing, health, direction, finding my voice in some way. And but the thing I ended up finding in that culture when I was in my early 20s was that I found a really great community there, and that the focus of the training was about making a positive impact on 3 major levels. And that was self, community, and world. And so that you're always working on all 3 of those. And that has really come into focus for me since the pandemic as well, because we've all gone so internal, but we've also had this huge world thing, and we've had to focus in on our local communities as well. And I really feel like, you've been somebody who's been working on making an impact on all 3 of those levels as well. We'll dig into more of that. But on a big picture level, how have you knowingly, you're being aware, tried to shift culture in your own life and work?
Mm.
Maybe unknowingly.
Yeah. I think sometimes knowingly and unknowingly. I think when you pose this question, it makes me think about how just subtle acts, I don't want to call them acts of defiance exactly, but seeing something not quite right that needs, and for me, oftentimes that comes down to just someone's not being heard. I see this a lot in our design community, especially with young designers. I don't know why I feel so compelled to have why it feels so crucial, but it just does, that young designers need a platform and a voice. And so I think that if I am in a I work hard to cultivate that culture in my own studio. I have a lot of these are my walls, so I
Yeah.
get to create an environment that I always craved, and that's really just one of nurturing. It's how I am at home. It's like, be curious, um, ask hard questions, give hard answers, be truthful, do it with love. I really believe in that. Culturally is how, it's how I want to be to myself. It's how I am with my children and my husband. It's how I embrace communication and collaboration here in the studio.
Right.
So when you extend that then to your community and you're not seeing that happen, and it would better the situation, it better the environment, it better the
Yeah.
future, then I think I look for ways to model that subtly or not so subtly sometimes, to success or not. I'm still learning how to influence, I think, when it gets outside of my immediate grasp. But that's really the culture shift that I feel really compelled to be a part of.
Yeah, that's that getting bigger, growing bigger out in the world. And with my experiences now with a few years, ahead here, um, that starts to expand. Once we create that at home and we're able to create that community, then we want to look bigger and see what is the impact we can make in the world when you've got that strong core unit. Um, so yeah, it just how you exist in the world. And I think that was in the training that I had with my martial arts community. Was it's not about learning how to fight and protect yourself.
Yes.
Yes, it's great. That's wonderful side, piece of it. But it's about what you put out into the world all the time,
Right.
every day, for whoever's in front of you and on the grander scale. And, I think at our age is, in the middle, as we hit middle age, we start thinking about, all right, what's the impact I need to make now on a larger scale? Because it's less about me, and more about a larger picture. I was listening to a podcast you had done a few years ago, and you had a few things that you wanted to be when you were growing up. You didn't necessarily want to go and be a designer. Um, how did you choose design? What were some of those things that you wanted to be, and how did you choose design as your
Yeah. This will be just the honest answer, not the sexiest answer. I wanted to be so many different things, which this is also such a timestamp. I feel like we had to choose a thing.
Yeah,
And now when you ask
completely.
a young person, they're like, this
I don't
and that and
know.
that and that and that, just multifaceted, just hyphen, hyphen, hyphen.
Right.
And I love that. I love that about this generation. But no, I think I had, dolphin trainer was really high up there.
That one I
Loved
didn't know about.
animals. um, that was really young and early on. But photojournalism, child psychology, and fashion design were like these, when I came push to shove, like junior year of college and starting to pick your head up. I was never a strong, very focused or dedicated student. I was like a very weird A's or F's kind of person. Like, if I'm into it, I will be 100% there. Um, and if I didn't see the value of it in my future or in my daily life, it was like, so I excelled in things like my journalism class and psychology, philosophy. my history classes I really loved, things like that. Math, science, not so much. But I think that when I talked to my parents about it, to their credit, with 5 kids, they were just very, um, first of all, it was like, you pay your own way, you pay for your own way. We're not helping with college. We've got 5 kids. So do the thing that you don't mind being in debt for. Right? Or also, I think that they didn't see me as a person that was going to be really academically successful in a traditional college
Yeah.
pathway. But at the end of the day, also, my dad said, you can, if you have a passion for caring for young people, you can always find a way to do that. You can volunteer, and do the thing that's going to bring you the most joy. And my parents were both very much like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life kind of mentality, and always trying to find that for themselves. So I really got to be encouraged by that. And
That's great.
but they definitely had their reservations. I'd never sewn anything. I had never shown an interest, particularly even in art and design. But fashion in particular was just sort of always for me about this. I loved fashion photography. I loved magazines. I was subscribed to Vogue magazine at 12 years old, not, I don't know, whatever one was reading, YM or something at the time.
Right,
but
right.
I just loved those images. And I always and still really think in those terms, the finished product, the finished visual, and how that makes someone feel is always been
Yeah.
a driving force for me.
Totally, totally. That was always my thing as well. I had the stack of Vogue magazines and a stack of music magazines, in my youth as well. And but yeah, it's just that the dream of it, that the visuals and the artisticness, but yes, how it made you feel. Because I always
Yeah.
knew like how I felt in clothing if it wasn't right. I knew a sense of being really uncomfortable or wearing things that weren't me. And so I knew the power of what the right, that clothing could do to bring out the person, the bringing out the woman, as I would say.
Mm.
I'm curious about the child psychology because I actually do talk to a lot of designers and maybe a lot of women, female designers, who are very like myself. I studied anthropology and philosophy and some psychology as well. And that interest is there across
Yes.
those. And I'm curious why child psychology for you?
I just kind of got goosebumps thinking about how absolutely right you are about how interconnected those are. I think that even as a designer, I'm just don't talk that much about product anymore. That's going to sound weird. That's all I do. I talk about product all day long, strategizing product, but it always stems from who is it for and why do they care? What do they care about?
Yeah.
And there must be a drive there because design is different than being an artist. I think an artist is really has something so intrinsic in them that they have to express it, and it's a very personal thing. And I think in design you bring yourself to it all the time, but really you're thinking about who is this for and how am I improving the experience of their life through this thing. So you really have to think about you have to have a lot of empathy to be a good designer, I think. So yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of understanding what makes people think and behave and feel a certain way and wanting to solve it, help them through it.
Right.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, you just stated that really eloquently, in terms of those differences that I've experienced with people doing fine art or art, music or whatnot for themselves or for not for themselves so much, but from that place of, like you said, this is my expression of something. And that is what the artistic training is really for as well. But in design, or at least in the world that we work in apparel design, it's so integrated with another being or other beings of what you're trying to create. You're not just trying to create, a beautiful dress that's just going to sit here and be a beautiful, it's not really a beautiful dress until somebody's wearing it and being in it and existing in it and enjoying it, or interacting with it, and how it makes
Yep.
people feel. I remember growing up feeling like, I remember hearing, because I grew up as a teenager in the 80s, and most of the male designers, aside from Donna Karan and a few others, were men. And they would say, women can't design for women because they can't remove themselves from the process. Men can look at women objectively. That's what I grew up with. And I disagreed. But they said women will just design for themselves. And I think we're finally at a place where the most successful designs and designers are the ones who design for themselves, that group that they relate to and are empathetic with. So, and that to me is a massive cultural shift.
Absolutely. That really puts into perspective, Diane von Furstenberg, or someone who kind of came up with that era and said, a woman I and many women like me want to be provocative and comfortable at the same time. Imagine that,
Right.
So I think, stepping into that power and putting yourself, you still have to think about how my experience relates to others and others like me, and what can I offer them. But absolutely.
Yeah. So you decided to design, went to school, and you went to school at the Art Institute in Seattle. I went to the Art Institute in Portland, probably around the same time.
Actually, I think that there wasn't one in Portland, and I think that was good for me. Just that 3-hour distance from my family.
I think Seattle was there first, and I went to Bassist College in Portland. And by the time I graduated, Art Institute bought it, like my last 6 months.
That's right. So, exactly. Right. That's exactly what happened. And I think actually, to everyone's shock and awe, including my own, is I was a superstar student. I started school in the summer course. I went straight through the following summer. I graduated early, top of my class. I was the department tutor. I got to be paid because I was literally living there. I was there all the time, working all the time in the studios. And I was like, oh, I can get paid to do the same thing that everyone's asking me for advice anyway, So I think I was very intimidated starting. There were people who had been making their own clothes all through high school, and they were just so I thought so ahead of where I could be, but I just really, I thrived because I loved it. And it was, there were no F's because I was just so into everything
you found
that I was learning.
Yeah, you found something there. What do you think hooked you? Like, what do you think you loved about it?
Oh, gosh. I think that I was learning the skills, because the Art Institute program is very tactical. You didn't focus as much on concept development, and there was much less of an emphasis on, like, a portfolio was just a thing you did at the end to get a job, but there wasn't a lot of theoretical work. It was like, this is how you cut and sew things. These are the pattern making classes. And I think what worked for me is that learning those skills and working with my hands in that way was totally new for me, but I loved it. I loved learning that. And I loved, as soon as I could, I would get a friend, my boyfriend in college was a photography major, and we would do photo shoots and we would make the beautiful image, right? So it's like, it was a means to an end, I think, that I had always dreamed of. I loved doing photo shoots so much.
I mean, that was early on. I mean, you loved the photography and you went right there. And then that shows in what you've done in your work as a consultant in your business. all of these stories. You have a lot of interesting stories. They are interesting to me, that the pathways of how we get somewhere, because that's what I love to talk about, is this nonlinear way, and the way that opportunities just suddenly present themselves, doors shut, doors open. And I loved hearing about when you came out of school and you went to Europe. But then I want to talk about what that was like in Europe, and go for
Yeah.
travel and being there in a new culture. Did you grow up traveling at all with your family?
No, no, because again, I mean, my parents were just above working class.
Yeah.
Really just scraping by to be in that middle class bucket,
Right.
and with 5 kids, our trips were camping trips to the coast for 2 weeks. No, I had not even flown. I had flown twice by the time I graduated high school.
Yeah.
A trip
I
to
totally
Mexico
relate to
and a
this.
trip to San Diego,
Mhm.
nothing very fancy, but yeah, here I was. I had an opportunity to I will say this, I actually got some like life-changing advice. I was so into getting to work. So graduating, I had an internship that I got through one of my professors, who was a tech designer, senior tech designer at Nordstrom Product Group, and she had recommended me for an internship there. So I was doing that. I was so proud of myself. I had a cubicle with my name on a tag and my
Oh,
own phone
yeah.
extension,
That's
and
big.
there's nothing about that that made me feel like a sellout, I mean, I just felt very accomplished, and I was 19 years old,
Wow. Yes.
so young. And they were ready to offer me a job, but I had an opportunity through some family friends to go stay in Spain and work at a men's tailoring brand, like a big Spanish company. And I was that sounded amazing, but I was like really tempted by this, salaried job with benefits, like all the things I'm supposed to do. And one of the senior designers there, she just looked at me and she said, "You better not stay here. You better go to Spain. This job will always be here."
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I wholeheartedly went. My mom and I went over there together, and we did the whole like Euro pass train thing for a couple of weeks, and got to Spain, and met up with our friends, our family friends, and they said, "We have terrible news. The company has just filed for bankruptcy." They had made all these arrangements on my behalf.
Wow.
But great news, you can stay with us and you can learn Spanish and you can travel the country and all of that. And I was just crushed, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not feeling like a backpacking gap year in
Yeah.
my future. I was really hungry to work. So, but it was all meant to be, because I ended up making my way up to Belgium with my dad. He came out, and he had lived there as a foreign exchange student years when he was in high school. And we reconnected with his family, and they said, "We're going to take your dad out for the day. You're going to spend the day with our sister Gerarda. She makes dresses and things. You guys will like each other." And I'm thinking, we were literally in like rural countryside of Belgium, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe she's got a tailoring or like an alterations shop or something. Oh my God, this woman has this like gorgeous renovated farmhouse in the countryside, yes, but just outside of Brussels, sort of between Brussels and Antwerp. And we had gone shopping for the day together. She took me around, and I'm in these shops looking at things that I've only seen in magazines,
Yeah.
and just all the Belgian designers and Japanese designers, these cult labels, and I'm touching things I've dreamed about. And she was so cool. She's my dad's age, but she was like Stevie Nicks meets Yoji Yamamoto or something. You know what I mean? Like, she was just
That's
the coolest
awesome.
woman with the most amazing style, taking me to these amazing places. We really hit it off. And we went back to her studio, which I realized when we walk in, and she's got, designer sketches on the walls, big cutting room, sewing room, sample room, all this stuff. And she says, I could really use some help around here. I'm sorry your internship fell through in Spain, but would you want to come to Belgium? And I'm
You're
just
like,
like,
what internship in Spain? I
I know
forget. It's like you forget
exactly.
all about it. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. So it was just serendipitous. It was like exactly the kind of place I needed to be and I wanted to be. And her sketches on the walls that she's talking me through is, oh, there's this designer, Veronique Branchino. And I just like my guts just dropped because her work was on my mood board, in my graduating portfolio. So I just thought I had discovered this designer that was by no means a mainstream designer,
No.
but just in those like,
Yeah.
there was this amazing magazine newsstand in Seattle at the Pike Place Fish Market, and I
Yeah.
would
I
get
know
all
it.
my expensive, magazines that would have like all the runway recaps and everything. But this is how I learned about this designer, and there was something about her style that I just absolutely loved. And here I was standing in the room where, with the team that brings those ideas to fruition. So I was just, um, this was one of those first lessons, I think, actually in my life that I have adhered to, which is just like the universe answers. And
Yes.
you put out the call and it answers. And I've been very fortunate. I know, but I've seized on those opportunities at these intersections, as they've come up, and it's not failed me yet.
I think that's the thing, and I want to talk about the Belgian designers for sure, because that's where we have a common interest as well. That this idea that you take the opportunities, keep that radar out. For one, we talk a lot about that in our martial arts community, as well as about setting your intention out into the universe, and then go do the homework, do the work, and but that to take those opportunities as they come, and they may look like the bottom falls out, they may look like you've made the wrong choice or something, but you're moving forward because they're leading to something else. As opposed to sitting there and trying to figure out what's, not making a move because you're not sure, is this the right one? Should I go here? Should I go there? Will I be happy with this? Just make a move. That's what I adore.
Yeah, nothing's permanent, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's like the worst thing that can happen is what? And then you can kind of work yourself back up to a reality from there. The worst thing that can happen is that it's not the right fit and I go home. Okay, like we'll sort that out.
That you've managed to find yourself right there. And I know many, a lot of people in our audience will know the Belgian designers, and a lot of them won't. But if you're in the fashion world, and if you're into women's fashion, part of that Antwerp 6, and Emile Meester is one, she was my favorite. So and good. All of them, but they have a style. Even when you get somebody like Heider Ackerman who's Colombian, but he is very clearly that style there with them. All of that was a huge draw for me, especially coming from this kind of post-apocalyptic punk rock Mad Max world. It was like, that was my thing. But you find it in these.
It was very punk rock.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. And that is their thing. But it also was to me, very functional, more functional of the higher end fashion, even though it's lots of layers and, but to me as a woman, it was like, there's a sexiness about it that, incorporates that menswear. It incorporates all kinds of, it breaks the rules. Yep. And you can decide how you want it to look, and nobody else has to get it.
There was a sensibility to it, and especially with Veronique, I think she had this is really where I learned, I didn't realize that I learned my value for the idea of a muse, like always having a muse. But she said very clearly, I designed for the most interesting girl at the party, the most interesting woman at the party, not the sexiest, not the most beautiful, the most interesting. And I think that really, that's aspirational to me, that she took menswear classics and really hyper feminine, slips and almost these like undergarments from the turn of the century. And she would just mash them up over and over and over again. Every season was really inspired by a new angle of that same sort of set of ingredients, and I just loved it so much. And I think I still have a few pieces in my closet that I got, gifted to me from working with her, but they're just as relevant today. And that's something else that I think I really resonated with me in that culture and spirit of Antwerp at the time was really anti-fashion, really. It was luxury from a price point perspective because of how they were made. A lot of those designers were making in Belgium. I mean, the woman I worked for was the sample house for these designers.
Yeah.
And they literally went from like our working relationship together to the factory a few miles away. So there was a real community that was very collaborative. And I had a meeting. I was at the factory one day meeting with the owner, and Ross Simmons comes in to like, just like talk really chaotically about whatever trip he was on his way. He was just super young. Him and Veronique were dating at the time.
Okay. She was pretty new too, right? And
they went to university together, and I think they graduated the same year or very close to each other. And again, that was sort of that. There was a real sense of unity and camaraderie in that circle because you just sort of had to. I mean, Belgium was just like this tiny pin on a map, and they were presenting it as part of Paris Fashion Week. But at that time, when I was there, it was like all eyes on the Belgian designers, So I think that it was an exciting time.
That's a great experience. I mean, I would love to, because I stumbled upon that. I guess I would see it in magazines and not know. And then I stumbled upon it when WGSN first started. And I was starting my first job and had access to when that first launched. And I was always looking for new places to travel because we would get to go to Europe, for the trade shows and whatnot. And then I would be able to hit a couple of other cities. So I always wanted to go somewhere new. And I picked Antwerp. Yeah. And because of somebody's report, and I went there by myself, been there a couple of times, and fell in love with it, and just went, "Oh my god, this is my secret, city. Right?" Yeah, yeah, it's one of my favorites.
There's something about how they really pushed for, it's like maybe to a fault, in a sense. There's like a, no names on the door kind of mentality. Like you have to know, be in the know. And it's very Belgian too. It's like every house sort of looks the same. Everyone drives the same sensible automobile, but what is behind closed doors could be a total disaster or a complete gem. It's very much part of the culture to not be too flashy and,
I had a sense of also because a lot of the their studios were right there in Antwerp. I had and the more I had read about Anne and some of the designers and how their lives were, I was like, oh, I want more of that kind of life where it's just integrated. It's just part of that. And then she went into housewares and whatnot, and just this kind of this larger the view of everything's integrated. And I think that really speaks to, the type of people that we are, and then also what we end up designing for. And that's a place where when I was talking about travel as a culture shifter, because I didn't grow up traveling either. And then I started to travel more when I got into design, and that just blew the world wide open for me. I mean, it completely shifts your mindset, right? Like, what you think's possible, what, all the different options in the world, how people think differently. So that was, to me, a big culture shift.
Absolutely. You asked me about that, and I went off on a tangent, but I did. It's like I went from no travel, essentially, to once I was in Europe, And that's a culture in Europe as well. It's just like a really connecting, making it easy to cross borders, and you're having it's like 2 hours on the train, and you can be hearing a new language, eating a completely different style of cuisine, hearing different music,
Yep.
people dressing completely different. It was just, I loved that. I was just a sponge, and I was very fortunate to really, I got a lot of stamps in that passport in that first year, of being
That's
over
great.
there. And
Oh my
mhm,
God. That's so great.
absolutely.
How would you say then, because then from there you went into designing for some big companies back here in the US. And we can talk about that because I want to talk about that company culture. But also, like, before we dig into that, because you ended up working, and I'll let you talk about this, in more of the athletic and sport world, or yeah, we'll go there. But how would you say that your experience in Europe and your love for these types of designers and clothing influenced that? And what was that feeling from going to Europe as a new young design student, learning from these people, coming back home, and your opportunities in the Pacific Northwest that go, "Hey, here's what we have to offer for you."
Yeah, yeah. Well, I came back. I came back in part because I was in Antwerp when 9/11 happened,
That's right.
and
Right.
we were
Right.
getting ready for Paris Fashion Week.
That's
Was in
right.
early October, and I can't remember if it was actually if it was scheduled to be sooner and it got pushed out, or if it stayed on schedule. I can't remember, but I just remember it was like the first week in October or something. So
Right.
really had a very short window. A lot of people canceled their shows, and a lot of people pivoted very quickly the messaging of their shows, if not the clothes. And I was assisting two main designers, completely different, a Brazilian designer and for any which could, like, their collections couldn't be more different. But
Right.
um, I think that upon returning, um, it was it was really challenging. I had some other friends who had just graduated around the same time as me as well. And they were in New York City with their portfolios in tow, um, banging on doors when 9/11 happened. And it just kind of stopped everything, right? So
Yeah.
there were job freezes. I think that to some extent, being a very young designer, being hired as a junior, not even assistant designer, associate designer, those types of roles were a little less hard to come by. I think if anything, it was probably harder to be moving around that time as a more senior person. But um, yeah, I came back to Portland, and sure, there's really not a fashion. Certainly at the time, early 2000s, not a fashion scene so much in Portland. I think that Project Runway was like
I
just
think
becoming
so.
a thing, and maybe we had like a there was always like a Portland,
Right.
person on there, and some that
Absolutely.
did very well. But it wasn't as much as there's a culture that really supports independent businesses, and there were a few people doing things, but I wouldn't call it an industry so much. So the industry and the opportunities really for that world were in New York, if you're going to stay stateside, and that wasn't happening after
Yeah.
9/11. So
Wow.
yeah, the prospects were the sportswear companies, and I got a job at Janssen Swimwear, which was a heritage brand. I very fortunately got put on the heritage kind of archive collection called the Diving
Nice.
Girl. It
Nice.
was Janssen's attempt at getting back into the higher end market, which it had always historically been a part of, but
It had
had
fallen off. Yeah.
sort of devolved over the
Yes.
course of a few decades and a lot of different ownership. exchanges and things like that of the company. But
it's also, it's a very old brand. I mean,
yes,
so
from
in
the
its logo,
1910s or something. Yeah.
so it had its heyday at a different time. So yeah.
I mean, my grandma was so proud of me when I got a job at Jansen Swimwear. Let's just say that. She said, if you didn't have a Jansen, you just better not go to the beach, was her thing to me when she was growing up, you know. So, but I got to be a part of this really small team that dug into the archives, which were beautifully maintained, and um, pulled together collections that were really intended for, you know, getting the brand back on the map. And I got to be a part of that team that presented to retailers and buyers and editors with the senior designer. And we got it back on, like, Fred Siegel bought it. And again, it wasn't even so much about like, this is the bathing suit. It was like, I got to be part of the team that worked, the marketing team, to say, how are we going to get people to feel really excited by this? What's the story? And
yes,
our press kit was literally, we bought vintage suitcases, little miniature ones, and packed it with the samples and some of her, you know, the diving girl's personal affects. Like, this is the compact she would use, and
wow,
the perfect
cool.
shade of red lipstick. You know, it was just like glamour, glamour, glamour. And we sent that to key buyers and they ate it up, you know. And it was just that art of storytelling coming to fruition. I was really, really fortunate because that wasn't the experience for everyone, you know, in that.
Yeah.
In that
And that's
company.
what a great bridge also from the fashion world into where you'd eventually go into the sport world.
Absolutely. And actually in swim, we were looking at, Jansen had the licensee also for Nike swimwear, Tommy Hilfiger swimwear, Perry Ellis swimwear. It had some other things in addition to its brand, but with the diving girl, yeah, I mean, we were looking at the red carpet for inspiration because there's such a red thread between, you know, these gorgeous halters and the textures of the materials and the color palettes, all that stuff, embellishments. So it was a lot of fun, and it felt like as close to fashion maybe as I was going to get, besides doing it myself, which I also was always dabbling. You know, Portland had all these fun little nightclub fashion shows and things like that.
Yeah,
and so I was always making stuff, and I was always, you know, I had brought home a ton of fabric from my time in Belgium. And so I was always making and showing and doing photo shoots and all of that kind of stuff, but never commercially.
This episode was brought to you by the Functional Fabric Fair, powered by Performance Days, the premier trade show for performance fabrics and materials. Since 2018, the Functional Fabric Fair has been providing a unique, highly curated trade show experience in the performance materials space, aimed at providing customers with the very best options to create the highest level products in the market. Having a strong focus on education and sustainability, the Functional Fabric Fair is committed to tackling the biggest issues we face today in regards to product manufacturing and our environment. With 5 shows throughout the year from Portland to New York City to Munich, you're sure to find what you need at the Functional Fabric Fair and Performance Days. I wanted to think about or talk about working at a big company and the cultural shifts there. Going a little bit, you know, non-linear in the conversation, but, you know, you're going from Europe and you're going from these, like, you know, boutique and fashion houses, which have their culture. And then you're coming here to some of the big companies, because eventually you ended up at Nike and Reebok and whatnot. And just kind of plugging back into some of these, and, you know, Jansen as well, you know, not quite as big, but they were a big company at one point, and I'm not sure what size they were, but what was that like, you know, to be part of a corporate culture for you, especially compared to Europe?
I got really lucky with my team at Nike, I will say. I had an amazing design director, Karen Francisco, who I still think, you know, reach out to as a mentor today. And we were an all-female team. There were just 3 designers and Karen. Um, we had female-led. Yeah, I mean, almost everyone on our team of maybe 20 people cross-functionally were women.
Wow.
And I had just become a mother myself, was embarking on that journey, which we can maybe talk about, but with my older son, and uh, it was a closely guarded secret that I was keeping. I didn't think could be hireable or get a job
Yeah.
if people knew, because I was so young in my career. I was still really, I was supposed to be the bench support, like they're hiring me too. But honestly, it's like as soon as the Band-Aid was ripped off and people really saw the life that I was living and who I was and what I had going on personally, sort of intersecting with my life there, things started to change. I got more design responsibility, and I was really supported. I think actually, in a very strange way, being the only mother on our team, but also the youngest person on our team,
Wow. Yeah.
sort of shifted the culture a little bit. Not that it was
Yeah.
always one that was very nurturing and celebratory of, sort of protective, I should say, of us as designers.
Yeah.
But that one was sort of like a, whoa, look, we need better balance here. Like I really want to make sure
Interesting.
everyone's um, taking time out to do the things that they feel passionately about. And I think it wasn't like singling me out as, Elisabeth, you really should not be rushing out the door to pick up your toddler and bring him back here, which I was doing. Like
Wow.
I was doing it quietly, and
Yeah.
so anyway, things shifted. I felt really supported and loved by that team.
That's great.
I will say that I know not everyone had the same experience. I did have my first corporate, oh my God, kind of moment there when I came into work one day and there were laminated articles on every single, I mean, I was in the design department, so I don't know if it was company wide. I don't know if it's just apparel wide, but there was an article had come out and there was this cartoon depiction of Kevin Plank as David and Phil Knight as Goliath.
Oh,
And it was this scathing article about how Nike was this sleeping giant and how could this no-name brand come out of nowhere and just dominate this niche market, but really it was transcending into youth culture with Under Armour. And that did not go over well. And there was literally, it was like this company-wide, apparel group-wide memo that starting today, like we're going to be number one in this category. And so I kind of, that just didn't sit right with me, I
yeah.
just kind
Yeah.
of felt like, what? I mean, so someone just did something you weren't doing and they did it better than you. Like leave the guy alone.
Yeah.
you know?
The competition.
Or
Was it the competition and from the big wigs saying, no, we're going to crush?
we're gonna crush them. Like how dare they? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I didn't love that.
Yeah.
But I also, it was like I didn't experience that type of vibe there very often. But I also think it had so much to do with the leadership that I had very specifically on my team um being unique. And yeah, I mean, I left Nike for love. I moved cross country to be with Mark and to start our family together, Mark, Mikhail, and I, and went to Reebok. And I just remember thinking it's going to be more or less the same, right? Like one
Mm-hmm.
big sportswear giant for another, and the culture was completely different. I mean, Boston's culture is completely different than Portland culture. And I had culture shock for sure. Moving here, it took a very long time to adjust to that.
What were some of those challenges? I mean, those things that you saw, like the main high points of this was different, this is different, this was hard. Because I had my own experiences also with culture shock from one brand to another as well. And it's very hard to get over that. when you hit
Yeah.
it, and to get coached through that in some way.
Yeah. I think that, honestly, I went from a female led team to, not very many women in leadership positions. I felt that culture. I think that instead of me, I won't say I felt it from everyone, but you know, Reebok was in a time of transition. Adidas had just acquired the brand, and I think that that transition for them was sticky.
Yeah.
I think that people thought of it as a merger, but Adidas was like, "Oh no, like we own you now."
Right,
You know what I
right.
mean? It was like the vibe um was a little off, but I just think that it it's so fascinating to me. Nike, or if it teaches you anything, is confidence, belief in the brand. It was so powerful and palpable. Having those maxims really ingrained in the culture, and you see them show up and they get referenced on a regular basis. It's there's something I actually really appreciated it and loved it, because there was a methodology to it that was bigger than any individual's
Yeah.
uh, opinion. And I think that what I learned was that, like, that's not how it is everywhere. That's sort of weird to me, like being in a design review and having people personalize everything, was just shocking to me. And I really tried to model how to recenter, feedback around a brief, for example, and a need, and who is it for, and taking it away from, like, I would wear it, I wouldn't wear it, I like it, I don't like it. It was just
Yeah.
it was less strategic and a little more, um, personal, which I think also when you personalize things can start, egos can come into
Yes.
play a little bit more.
Yes.
So
Absolutely. And that
navigating
yeah.
that was tough.
Yeah, and that was how it was at Reebok?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
and that's when you get that I mean, being in Portland myself, at Columbia Sportswear, and I knew people who worked at Nike. My ex-husband worked there for a time on the website, and Adidas as well. It's like it's such a it's so organized, and it's so big, and it has so many arms, and when you end up at these other companies that are much smaller and a little, I don't know, further behind. Some of them are older than the company itself. I know Columbia Sportswear had a great organization that came from the shadow of Nike, and a lot of it was a very old company, and a lot of the people came from Nike, and a lot of things were in place because Nike had it as well, and so it was heavily organized. And then when I went to the North Face, it was a complete opposite type of culture, and that was a massive, shock. I think very similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Those
There
personal
were some
things hitting.
aspects that were more entrepreneurial, which I also
Hmm.
really liked.
Yes.
I will say, once I got the hang of really navigating fragile male egos in some cases, which was new, just new for me. Um, I was Our creative director, Michael Schaefer, who's gone on to found, Noble, was not that guy. I will say, if only his style of leadership could have trickled down to other parts of the organization, we all would have been better for it. He was such a collaborative player. Like, good ideas come from anywhere. That's definitely something I've carried forward with me. Um, Interns had a seat at the table just as much as his design directors did, and I loved that about what he brought to the table and the culture. But it was entrepreneurial in a way that you can't really get at Nike. At Nike,
Yeah.
it's like, you're this designer on this category, you design, and we will protect you in that design bubble.
Yeah.
But you don't see a finished product. You don't see something after a second proto. You have no exposure to the photo shoots and things like that. So
Yeah.
I got really lucky on my category at Reebok. They put me on all the collaborations, so with artists, um and because it was so tight, it was on its own timeline. I would work directly with marketing and PR agencies, and I got to travel and I got to present the line. And so it's like, it was pretty much as good as it was going to get for being a designer at a corporate company. I had a lot of autonomy, and I got to travel a lot and work a little more cross-functionally, I think, um, than a lot of other people would experience.
That's great. And it feels like something that fits your style, who you are, where you've come from, but then also what you chose to go into and running your own business. And we'll talk about in a few minutes about, how you got more into doing that. But going into running your own business, that's changing, that's bringing or developing your own community culture, but bringing your work culture into more of a personal realm. And so how has that, I want to see, how has that decision to do that impacted your personal culture, to go from that company to that, and then also the differences in working, as a startup with startups, because you're working, freelance, you would work with big companies and startups. So it's really going into that place of, personal culture, and it starts to integrate. And so the question starts to integrate too, because they're all affecting each other. We get our head around that question, double questions. I'll let you go from there.
I think so. I think that when I left the corporate environment and started freelancing, my first freelance project, as soon as it got just a little out of my comfort zone and realm, I started picking up the phone, and calling people I know and having them come in and just work with me for a couple hours on something, farming things out. I shouldn't say farming things out, because I always try to bring it in,
Yeah.
maybe
well, you're getting help.
work on this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had this aha moment. I remember I didn't have my own space yet. I was at this cool kind of before WeWork, but something kind of like that in Boston. And I had this graphic designer and this color designer, both who had been previously laid off by very talented, but one of those mass layoff situations. And we're collaborating on a project with a new startup brand that we're really excited and energized by. Their passion for it. It's coming from such a real place. And I just had this aha moment. I was just like, there shouldn't be design teams at corporate companies, there just shouldn't.
Yeah.
This is how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to come together and be excited during daylight hours, mind you. We're actually designing, in the middle of the day, and not meetings,
not at night when you go home. Right.
And listening to music at the volume that we want it at, and in an environment that is clean and has plant life, and it was all coming together. And I just thought, and you know what, we didn't agree on everything unanimously. It was a push and a pull and and critique with no egos involved. And I just loved it, and it just felt like, this is what I want to do. I want to create a space where this is how designers work together, and big companies hire us to do the work, and then we give it back to them when it's right, and don't get stuck in all the process, process that bogs us down. I think we have our own process. It's not willy-nilly, but I think that it's trust. It's letting your colleagues trust the creative process.
Yes.
It takes the right environment, though, for that. It's like growing plants in the right environment or the wrong environment, and so
it takes that ability to create the environment and run it, but also be the bridge to the companies that you're working with to build that trust and lock those teams to being able to work together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's an interesting when you wrote that in your notes, I had an aha moment just this morning. And it was an interesting thing to read it because I noticed a shift in my own self and my own personal culture is that several years ago, probably a decade ago now, I felt exactly the opposite. And I was saying there should not be design firms and outside teams. And I thought about that and I went, I don't agree with that anymore. But that was a very strong feeling I had because I was working as a design team leader in these companies. And I had had a great experience with a wonderful mentor and somebody who created this exact space that you talk about within the company at Columbia Sportswear. It existed there for a time because of the people, and it was very protected. And then when that broke apart, and then I wasn't able to experience it at other companies, and I was trying to create it. I felt like a lot of our teams weren't getting the great projects that we had the talent and ability to do, and they were being given to design firms because we were overloaded with the process. We were overloaded with the bread and butter. And so it's the same feeling that you're having, that you have. It's the same reasoning, but with a different perspective of, all right, what we want is be able to have a design culture that can do what we do best in the way that we do best and not taken over by the corporate culture.
Absolutely. And you need, I could see how it would be a huge source of frustration because I've actually stepped into that many times. Our team comes in to work on the fun, cool thing, get free reign. No one questions, your wild ideas. They're telling you, we want your wild ideas. I know that that's frustrating for a designer who's also so capable of doing that same quality of work, but they're not viewed the same way. When you take away the magic and the romance and have your design team, it boggles my mind that we think and expect that a person who chose to go to design school, who spends their 4+ years in studio / lab environments, working and honing their craft, you want them to sit in a cubicle and be in meetings all day long, draft perfectly formatted emails, which I got pretty good at, I'll be honest. It's probably how I've been able to navigate, this business and get these caliber projects. But I don't need or expect my designers to have that same skill set, and the more that you're honing that craft, you are not honing the thing you've been hired to do, the thing you've been trained to do. It's like we all, creative directors really look for designers with like these really impressive portfolios and then put them in a box. And not let them express any quality of that caliber of
very limited work. Very limited.
I think that people get really, I was just talking about this with someone the other day that, designers, I was a creative director I'm working with. She said, PMs, in design, it's like, it's the checks and balances, and you need that in every project. I'm often playing the both sides of that fence, with my team as well. But I think everyone has to come to the table knowing that designers want nothing more than to see the work, not even their work, but our collective work out in the world. We want to hit the target, but how we get there might look different and uncomfortable to you. So you need design leaders to really bridge that language barrier, because it really is like speaking a different language, and say, we've got all the needs, we've captured it. Let us play a little to get at the thing you're asking for, plus the thing that you didn't know to ask for. Because why would you? That's not how your brain's wired, you know.
Yeah.
So I think I I'm not to say that there shouldn't be any corporate design teams, but my call to action is that people in leadership roles at corporations really need to rethink what that environment is,
Yes.
and
Right.
not in a beta testing kind of way, and it could go away
Exactly.
tomorrow.
Right.
It
There has to
really
be
is a
commitment.
necessity. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, the thing is that I'm really much more in your camp now in terms of that because what we were both talking about is the fact that designers and design culture needs design leadership. And what
Yeah.
happens, we don't have that design leadership in so many of these companies. And as you were saying, like sometimes you come in and you have to almost play therapist to the young designers, which is what Struktur ended up being a lot for a lot of young people, pulling people together in one room and realizing I didn't realize that all these other designers were having this same challenge and I thought I was weird and my company makes me feel like I don't fit in and
Yeah.
they want to be understood and they want to be mentored and help to grow in their field. And
Yeah.
there isn't much of a path to growth in a lot of these companies for designers, which is why they end up leaving, freelancing, starting businesses and doing other things. So
Yes.
with that, I don't think that companies right now in a lot of apparel industries, it's a little different in digital and graphic design and industrial design in some ways. They don't have the setup to really nurture a design culture and a design team the way a design firm does. And
Yeah.
you kind of need to have one or the other because they don't necessarily, if you don't have it in the company and you bring in the design firm, you're going to have odds. You're going to have issues. And that's
Yeah.
what we have now, a lot of.
Yeah. And it's completely anecdotal, but I do feel like it's a very real, real time experience of, for example, of we were hired by a large company uh, to design a season of running apparel, and their brief to us was, we should be doing well in this space, but honestly, like the world doesn't need more running clothes. They don't, and no one's asking for running clothes from us. So like they brought us in because they're like, we've been watching what you're doing with Track Smith and John Jean, these smaller D2Cs that are very niche and have created space for themselves in a really crowded category. And we want you to, like, what does that for us look like? So we did it. We pushed it. We pushed it way out of their comfort zone. Very few questions asked, however. Like they loved it. It was such a fun project to work on. We felt really respected, and seeing it come to market was great. Like they use a lot of our creative swipe, telling the whole story and how it could come to life at the tail end. So it was like dream project, right?
Yeah.
Well, fast forward a year later, my head designer at the time, uh, we were transitioning our agency a little bit, and I joined my husband's company full time for a while. So anyway, we with total support and love, she went on to that company and took the head designer role for that same category.
Mm.
About a
Wow.
year later, she's like, I don't get it. I don't get why am I getting so much pushback now? And what, they loved what we did, and we and now all I'm getting is pushback, water it down. You're not checking the brief, and I just thought, see, there's just that there's a layer of magic that exists when you don't know too much, maybe about someone's,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of that like man behind the curtain magic, maybe that needs to exist when you're mixing cultures, mainstream culture with a subculture. You know what I mean? It's
Yes.
like, I'm not sure what exactly is driving that all the way through to fruition, but that's a problem that needs shifting.
Yeah, and that's that crushing that that feeling of that creativity, especially when somebody like your designer who got to experience working with you in your environment, and then that culture shock of going to another place, and then where do you go from there? I want to talk about two things, your choice in family, becoming a mom, because that's really something close to my heart. And then also, the future, where does the design culture need to go? And I think a big piece of it for me too is that being a mom as well and having my history having a similarity to some of yours is that these things they're not separate from where we are as a culture right now. And as designers, we are empaths. We are the people that are leading things, and we are emotional, and our lives and our experiences come through our creativity. And as like the author Seth Godin says, we need creatives, we need artists right now. We don't need managers, we need leaders, and artists are the people that we need. So coming into that, I want to talk about those two things to finish us off. And one is, and people can hear this also in some of your other podcasts and stories, but your decision to become a mom at a very young age. Want to just talk a little bit about that, kind of talk quickly about how you got there. And I don't know what you want to share the most about that, because you have a child that you adopted. That was your sister's child, and you were very young. And then you met Mark, and then he came into the situation too. And you guys were what, 23, 26, kind of in that. Yeah. And it reminds me of, was that about, because I think those are the numbers there were similar.
Like, that sounds right. Yes.
It's a similar thing for me that my biological father wasn't in the picture, and my mom she had me very young at 21. And but she ended up really pulling it together and being like you, like, I'm kicking this person to the curb. I've got to pull this together and make this happen. And I think she was 27 when she married my dad, who was 23. And when they got married, he said, I want to be her dad and I want to adopt her. And I want to be that person that's there. And he's been my dad ever since. And so
that's so awesome.
So I wanted to share that and then have you talk a little bit about your experience in becoming a mom at 23. So or sooner, I think, right? I don't know.
I am. Like, I'd have to do all math by how old he is now and like work backwards. It's so funny how you forget. I forget. It's like my life just, I handed it over. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like, you are the new mile marker for all things. So I was a assistant designer at Janssen Swimwear when my sister gave birth. My older sister was just not in a position to accept the role of motherhood at that stage of her life.
Yep.
And he was immediately put into foster care in the state of Georgia when I was living in Oregon. My mom and I flew there immediately as soon as we learned my sister was in labor and all of that stuff. So I think actually the maternal, whatever that instinct was, kicked in the second I met him. I got to hold him as a baby for 3 days straight in the hospital. And it was an unforgettable experience. Looking back on it now, I realized my mom was there as a mom to her daughter in need, right? And I think I was there for this little baby boy in need.
I got chills.
Yeah. I know. I think that, there were, a series of events that led to him being not reunited with biological parents and going to be open to adoption. And man, when it rains, it pours, right? My mom had just been re-diagnosed with, she had an ongoing long-term battle with breast cancer. She had just been freshly re-diagnosed with that when we got the call that, we're no longer attempting this path, and would you be interested? So it wasn't an easy decision per se as a family. It was a lot to discuss. My parents aging out of parenthood years,
Yeah.
being confronted with some serious health issues. And I was the middle of five, but young and just starting my career. Honestly, I think I was making like $18,000 a year or
Oh my
something like
God.
that as an assistant designer at
Blows my
Janssen,
mind. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also working from like 8:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. on a regular basis, So,
Yeah.
but I think from my family's perspective, it was just sort of like not even in the realm of consideration. But for me, it just was. It was just like okay, well then I'll adopt him, right? Or we'll adopt him. Like he'll
Yeah.
come to Oregon, and it took a lot of time and paperwork and um, red tape, but thankfully, when he was 17 months old, we got the call that everything was finally set and ready, and he could come to Oregon. So yeah, and it's just funny. Again, you put some energy and things out into the universe, and it
Yeah.
responds. So the night before I left to Georgia, I went to go meet the foster family who'd been caring for him since he was born. They were lovely, and I didn't know anything about babies, and I broke up with my dumb boyfriend at the time, and I moved home with my mom, who was going through like chemotherapy
Oh
and
God.
radiation, and we went to foster parenting classes together, my mom and I, because I legally wasn't I wasn't legally allowed to foster
Foster.
him
You were too
alone.
young,
I
right?
was too
Yeah.
young, yeah, for the state right rules, even though I was a family member. Um, so we kind of co-parented in the beginning until I could get legal guardianship of him, and then I moved out. But I went out with some friends, like last hurrah, I guess. It was funny. It was a fashion show at a bar, of course, in Portland. And I ended up having this. I am still to this day very socially awkward and shy person, but I think maybe because I wasn't worried about impressing anyone, because I was literally embarking on a completely different path that had nothing to do with impressing young men or dating or anything
Your
like that.
guard was down.
My guard was down, and I just was being myself, I think. And Mark and I, who had been in the same room in other occasions, had never exchanged words, just sort of had a moment, I guess. We just sort of talked a little bit, made some really serious eye contact, and had a laugh about some whatever. And he ended up asking a friend, our mutual friend, about me, and she's like, she's like gonna go get her nephew and like be a mom, and like hands off, buddy, kind of like you don't want
Yeah.
to deal with that. But he had a personal experience as well, where his father and siblings were taken in and adopted by the man who was his grandfather forever when he was a
Mm.
young man as well. So I think he
Oh,
he when he heard that, all he heard was, this is someone who cares about family, and I care about family, and I want to be her friend. So when I came back, a couple weeks go by, I've got an email in my inbox when I return to work from Mark McGarry, just saying
mm.
hello, and so yeah, it was like a really, and then I got a job interview with Nike, and I got the job, and overnight I like tripled my salary, and it's like it was just all working out, you know what I mean? And then and Mikhail was this lovely, beautiful boy that we were just instantly best friends. And
I know you have a wonderful story with your partner, and I want to give that some time when we have time to do that, because I really want to hear it. And so we'll figure out when that's going to be. But your partner, your husband, Mark, and how you guys met, which is really through two means, right? Like one, through your jobs, at Nike, you were working together, but also through your personal family choices. On a personal side, you chose to do something which was, adopt your sister's baby while you were very young and single, which is something that would push many a prospective date and possible partners away.
Yes.
There's not a ton of people up to that task at that young age. But with Mark, it actually seemed to bring him in towards you
Yes.
very
Mhm.
almost magnetically. What are the common cultures that the two of you share both in your personal lives, and your creative work that you would say are that magnetic piece, that magnetism that bring you together?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think what we discovered very early on was that we shared a real love and appreciation for family. So our very first date was actually him taking me out for a celebration beer because I had just gotten the job offer at Nike. And we ended up talking for hours about our families. I don't know how many people in their 20s are going out on first early 20s
Right.
talking about their grandparents and their parents and their siblings at length like that. But we just did. And I think we both left there with a real sense of like, this person is really different and special
Yeah.
and maybe right for me. So, we had that in common. And I think that that really has translated into our career choices and building the studio and growing the studio and how we work with clients. It's always been family first. It's literally hashtag family first for everything. It's the benchmark that we weigh every decision against. Is it right for the family? And the family means different things in different contexts. And I think that that is literally our family, our boys, our parents, our siblings, and sometimes it's our team,
Yeah.
and it's who comes into this studio space and works with us. And I think that people who also embody that value are attracted to working with us, working for us as
Hmm.
collaborators, or working with us as clients.
Yeah, yeah, because the care is there, and the connection, And I
Yeah.
think that was similar with my parents as well. With when my mom had me and she met my dad, and that was the thing was he was so drawn and very connected to his family that he wanted to create that for himself and for us. And
Yeah.
when you're looking for that, when both of you are looking for that, that is one of the most attractive qualities, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that Mark always said in the beginning that he was curious about this adventure that I was embarking on in terms of becoming a mother, and he knew that we needed to be friends. He was curious if we would be
that's
more than
great.
that. I was
Mhm.
sure I was off the market forever, and I was just gonna be the fourth woman in a shoe with tons of adopted children or something. I just kind of I don't it just felt like that was the okay decision to make at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it really was meant to be, which is great.
Well, and thinking about the flow for this conversation, I was at every point and turn, I was really struck by how interrelated and interconnected all aspects of our lives and levels of culture are, and especially with how you've set your life up together. You've made that the thing. And that's a place that we all struggle in our culture is we have work and family and trying to find this kind of work life balance, which I always thought was funny because I thought, well, work is part of life. It's it's not separate from your life. Um,
Yeah.
it's hard to separate them to talk about them individually. Is they all shape each other. So I wanted to think about your work in design and that how that has shaped you, your family culture. Really thinking about how design shapes culture, because in a lot of ways, I was thinking about this question of does design shape culture? And we come in to create things and shift things and make things better, like that's we're problem solving. How do you think design might shape culture?
Yeah. I think that it's a chicken and egg scenario because I think that as designers, it's our role and our natural inclination to take in all the things happening culturally and solve for problems that result in good design, and that can influence culture, but it just is a constant stream of back and forth. I think if
Yeah.
we're
Mhm.
culturally in need of of something changing, I mean, I look at the last handful of years, we've had a lot of conversations around um, equity and inclusion and culturally different markets in particular that we get briefed to design and be a part of
Yeah.
are um, have been dominated by a singular tone of voice and a
Yeah.
singular leadership. I think people coming from a specific background. So I think that if you're paying attention to that, you can say through design, I can actually make this whole world more accessible by solving for you for solving for considering and communicating with and collaborating with people who have not normally been part of this culture. So or this activity set. So I think that that's a way that design can shift culture. You're literally just addressing a new problem, but I couldn't say that it wouldn't happen if the culture wasn't moving that way anyway or craving it and
Yes.
communicating it that need anyway.
Yeah, because there needs to be a timing and a consensus in a way that there has to be a
Yeah,
desire for it to gain momentum as well,
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That
So,
current is already kind of happening and it's definitely our job to have the finger on the pulse and be responsive.
how has your life and personal culture shaped your design work? You know, yeah, let's leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting one because I think that I I really use my work as a form of expressing parts of me that I don't embody, I would say, in my daily life. So
Mm, mm, like,
I'm a pretty uh introverted and sort of reserved maybe in many regards, but when it comes to design, I have a lot of fun and freedom and flexibility, and I dream big and I push my designers to think big. I love going all the way there and then reining it back in. um and I don't know that I'm that way. I'm a little more slow and steady and observant, I think, in my life outside of these walls. And then I think that when I'm in here, I'm really pushing for that.
it's like a creative portal, like a place for you to express yourself. I mean, that sounds kind of that sounds a bit cliche the way that I say it, but that's how it feels for a lot of us. Because I mean, almost
Yeah.
almost every designer I know and talk to or artist in some way feels like some form of introvert
Mm,
at all levels, and we might express ourselves because we all have that really strong need to express ourselves. Um, but yeah, having that place that you can play. And
yeah.
how do you think that has helped you in working with the brands that you have and getting the projects that you would want to work on? Has it helped you? Is it?
Yeah. Has it helped? I think so, because I do feel that I can be somewhat of a chameleon when it comes to different brands. I can really step inside and embody the customer that we're going for, really help shape the muse. And I don't personalize it. And I think that that's maybe an sometimes it's really personal,
Yeah.
every now and then we get a brief where this we really are the target consumer. I am, or one of my designers is, and we can get a little more um personal with it, but mostly I try to be very clear about who it is that we're creating for, and it's not myself. But I can this is back to that child psychology, that
Yeah.
psychology, curiosity and interest, I think is really, um, is being really open-minded and and responsive to who I think it is that we're designing for.
Well, yeah, that's the empathetic piece, which, is clearly something that you have also with that family piece. It really comes out in doing things for other people. But there is that interesting thing about design and being successful, especially in your own firm, is that you can create for the brands and the customer that you're working with, but you also have a style or a way of working or a way of doing things that is unique to you and your business that makes
Yeah.
people want to keep working with you, right?
Yeah. I do think that, well, maybe a lot of designers or creative directors have a specific stamp on their work. Mm, I might reel this back in a little bit, but I think that my style and my stamp is more about my way of working and
Yeah.
less about the final product. Um, but I will say that I remember when I first started my career and I started at Nike, I loved fashion so much, fashion in the traditional sense of the word, that took me a little while to understand how to design for sport,
Yeah.
and for sport lifestyle, even because as I started to shift my exposure and see more of the streetwear influences and how those worlds merge, it started to click for me a bit more. But I think that now I really challenge every project we work on to be functional. So perfect design for me is just really clearly, equally form and function. And if it functions well, it will take a beautiful form. I do believe
Yes.
that. So I think that very, very rarely are you going to see anything come out of our walls that isn't built for a very specific purpose and intent. I love that storytelling aspect. I'm constantly pushing our clients to dig deep and understand really what are the stories we're trying to tell. Why this pocket, as opposed to saying I love this other brand's pant or this,
Right.
and
Right.
comp. It's like, really, what's our story and how is it influencing our shapes, our language, our details.
Yeah. Never need to comp. Never need to comp. I don't know how many times so many of us have talked about this. How many times we've all been asked to do that, essentially. And I
Yes.
would always refuse. I don't need to, because even you always will have your own way of doing it. Some way you'll make it better or proper for the end result. And that comes with
Yeah.
how you work with your client and how your relationship with
Yeah.
them. What are you using it
Yeah.
for? Who are you? What are you trying to say? So, and
Yeah.
that's always going to be
I think
different.
that some of my most influential arguments for getting out of that now has been that we are getting comped styles that we designed years ago
No
for other
way. That's
clients.
awesome.
And I'm like, okay, so I can tell you a little bit of history about this piece. And what we looked at, we didn't look at anything else in the market. The reason why we landed here was because, these three ingredients together
Yeah.
created something new and interesting. So I really work with clients when I get those types of briefs to reel it back a little bit. What are the ingredients that we're working with? What's the
Yeah.
story we're trying to tell? And we can do this for you in your own way, and it won't look like this. And that's scary for people.
Yeah.
They see something working in the market and they want to have a piece of that. But I can't stress enough how much the opportunity is in creating new space.
Wow. I love that story though, when people bring you your own stuff, I bet
Yeah.
that just ups the level of trust. It's like, oh, you
Yeah.
like this. Great.
Yeah. Great. You liked it too.
Now here's what we're going to do for you. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. How important do you think design is to our culture today in your eyes?
Well, I think back to that question around culture shifting. I think, does this design shift culture? I think it definitely amplifies the most. It can amplify. The beauty is, the opportunity is, it can amplify the most important things happening culturally, or the things that people need to be aware of. So yes, good design is um, easier now to come by than I think it used to. I think all of us, you know, the Instagram, Pinterest effect, like everyone's awareness and sort of general acceptance of good design has elevated. But I do think that it's still the designer's role to be innovative, to think differently, to constantly push, um, somewhat with blinders on to what everyone else is doing in terms of comping, but with an open mind into what problems need to be solved for. And that's a delicate balance, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
absolutely, I think design can make people feel more seen, heard. It can create accessibility. I think that that's the beauty and importance of it.
Yeah. I like that. I love that actually. I mean, to feel seen and heard, and make things more accessible. I've actually never heard anybody quite say it that way before.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and you have a lot of people, you get like the Good Grips brand and whatnot, who really put a lot of focus on, usability and whatnot and making things accessible. Um, but I do agree with that feeling of it makes people feel seen and heard. I always grew up with the feeling of, like fashion design as being kind of frivolous, in other people's eyes. And it was always so important to me. And so I always had this lifetime search of trying to prove how important it is, even though people don't realize it. And when they experience good design, whether it's clothing and how it makes you feel, which we've talked about, um, it shifts everything, and you don't necessarily know why. And
yeah.
that happens on all these different levels because somebody or some group of people put attention to how somebody else might feel around this
Yeah.
product or, this idea of
Yeah.
something and how it looks. And so,
I think household items is really an interesting place for that too. I don't know why we're talking about this, and I'm thinking of, my child opening a lid in the kitchen, or something for the first time, and being
yeah.
overwhelmed with pride and a sense of
Mm,
accomplishment over something. And that's a design solution. That was,
mm,
I'm making this easier and more intuitive to use. I probably bought it because it's more beautiful,
mhm.
because it was more easy and intuitive to use. But how it can make someone else feel is accomplishment and a sense of pride. And that is the beauty, I think, and opportunity for design and designers.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, how it makes you feel. It's so much of it, and that's why it can be very difficult to put a formula on how to create that. Um, what do you see as the future of design going forward, and and the role of the designer, which is shifting? I like to talk to everybody about this, is how that role is shifting. And what do you see for that for you personally and your business and for your community and for the world? Is I always like to look at those three
Yeah.
levels. So
Oh, such a big question, Michelle.
and we only have a few minutes. No, I'm just kidding.
I know. I think the future of design. I think it's fascinating and interesting to think about how our lives and our forms of expression are shifting from purely in the real world to how we engage digitally and online. I think our lives online, for many of us, will just be as robust as in our real lives.
Yeah.
I think that opens a really interesting door to. We already see it, right? We engage online, for better, for worse, often for worse. We
we embody a different persona. And I do think that's interesting to think about how people maybe will take more risks with their personas online. And because of digital animation and AI, there may just be a lot of opportunity for you to really embody some different kind of energy and spirit in how you
Yeah.
present yourself online.
Yeah.
And the more comfortable you get with that, and the more you see yourself in that way, then does that translate into how we present ourselves in the real world? Do we get more
Yes.
creative and expressive after this genre of leisure wear and sweatpants? Will we maybe be a little more expressive again? I, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that I think that it would make sense that we'll either see two totally polar expressions. You're really expressive online and you're really minimal in your real life as resources and access to resources change and shift, or one feeds the other and it becomes more fluid.
Yeah. Yeah. I see like the lines blurring. Um, and as you were talking about, having this place that you can come to work and open up that creative portal, you're essentially saying the same thing about online, is this place for people to actually be seen, find a new way to be seen, is what I'm seeing a lot of. And now we're all just diving in, and you see some people are terrified and other people are just fully like, see me, and new people are rising up into awareness that maybe otherwise would not have been.
Yeah.
And somehow that's got to play itself out between these two worlds, and we have to figure that piece out. How do you see that playing out for you, at least in the short, long term of, your career and your team, your business? I don't know. Do you have any
I'm
idea?
just trying to be a sponge. I think it's really interesting actually to be at this stage of my career and feel like I have a certain level of expertise and acumen and that I can impart with clients, but I'm also just learning and interested and curious, and I'm really open to collaborating with especially young designers who
Yeah.
this territory, like they're growing they're building their earliest skill set in this new space. So I think I'm just trying to pay attention. I'm definitely seeing that there's a craving for with young people in particular after doing some mentoring work with mass art students and
Hmm.
with some East Boston high school students. Everyone is growing up and really living their lives online, but they're so craving real world experiences too. And I think that dichotomy is interesting, where I'm a little less like, I don't really want my kids online that much.
Yeah.
I'm kind of strict when it comes to that. I set a lot of boundaries around it for myself, um, but I'm trying to be more open-minded and see all the positives and benefits of a really digitally interconnected world, as long as we counteract that and have that balance with you know, being good stewards of the real world too.
Yeah. We're all navigating it together. The blind leading the blind, but trying to realize what we have to give to help lead our generation, while the younger generation are often leading in the tech world already. I'm finding I
Yeah.
have to learn from my son a lot. He's almost 12, and so I'm teaching him things and he's teaching me things, and it's this constant back and forth. And it's an interesting new type of role,
Yeah,
know how to parent like that and lead
I
younger
know.
people.
It's
Hmm.
just it's just being open-minded and having the conversation and saying, I don't know. So
Yeah, right.
what do you know? Maybe he doesn't know either. I mean, we have learned about each other that he pretty much trusts everything on the internet as probably true, and I trust almost nothing on the internet as probably not true. So, we have these interesting conversations, and now I think I think if the tech giants who are leading the charge with AI are telling governments to pump the brakes, and this is really amazing, but really potentially dangerous and risky. I mean, those are the kind of, we're having the same conversation at home, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
and with our work here as well. But yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive. It's an interesting time to be in a position where we not all industries, I think, have to really be confronted with this idea of digitally, like, where are we going digitally? What are the tools and technologies available to us as designers, as people making products? Our industry is a little behind the ball when it comes to that, but I do feel like everything's catching up so quickly. We're moving so much more quickly that I do think, there will be some tipping point and the industry will catch up. And are we all going to be 3D printing our clothes at home? I don't know. That wouldn't be a terrible thing for the planet, because maybe we would, that would reduce overconsumption and overproduction, I should say.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just really curious.
But these are the open-minded, like, toss it at the wall and blue sky ideas that we all kind of need to play with, and figure out where we want to go with that. Do you have any last words or things that you want to impart on the audience and anybody out there in the creative world?
I want to thank you for inviting me on to talk to you. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours more, and I know we will.
Yeah.
There's so much to break up, down, and dissect in this industry. And I think in particular, I'm really, really interested in working with leaders and founders in our industry on the value and importance of nurturing a creative culture within their walls. If it's not clicking right now, if it's if it was and you're struggling to keep pace with this evolving, I think, cultural climate and shift of how people want to be working, and how they want to feel at work and the work they're doing, I think that's probably my most interesting, curious area to discuss, and also really want to talk to people who are nailing it. Like, well, what's working? How do we keep people, really good, talented people, working in, I think, big companies? It's actually really important. Because, that's where all the resources lie, and we really need to keep the influence positive. And
they have so much influence, and deep pockets to make things. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I just keep wondering why, we see it when you talk about the things that are working and you get to the Patagonias, the things about where they're looking at people and planet before product, and their product, because they've nailed the product and they can keep working on that. But why that example exists and is so hard for others to follow. I don't understand that piece yet.
I don't either. I think people maybe feel like they need to reach a certain level of success before embodying their values, and I just don't think that's the way it works. I think slow and steady, which is really hard for people. There's just this sense of immediacy. I don't know if we were talking about this, but just the idea that there can be billion-dollar brands that disappear in a snap, and no one's going to really be upset by no one. I mean, consumers are, customers, are there really going to be any broken hearts over it? I think there's just been this massive push for massive rapid growth and in really unsustainable ways. And somehow, I think a lot of board members and people in leadership roles are using that as a benchmark for success. And I'm not really sure if the qualitative values and goals are being as clearly set and measured.
Yeah.
So
Well, I have to say, through talking with you and getting to know more about your whole career path and life path, you're such an example of just decide to do something because it's the right thing, and you do it, and you figure it out when you go. You figure it out through doing it. It'll work itself out. You have to do the work. But instead of thinking it all through and planning it all out and when am I ever going to be ready, it's like you got to do the right thing when the right thing needs to be done.
yeah.
And I think that's
You're never ready.
and I think that's what kids show us, right? They're like, well, I don't care if you're ready. We're here, and you've got to step up to the challenge. So
Absolutely. Well,
I think wonderful example. Thank you so much for sharing. And I can't wait to talk about more stuff.
Thank you.
But for now, we'll wrap up and let you get ready for your travels and get ready to see you in a month. When you
Yes.
too.
Oh my gosh. It's going to be so fun.
Oh my God. You have been listening to UnStruktured, the podcast from Struktur Society. If you enjoyed this episode, please download, share, like, subscribe, and add your thoughts and suggestions in the comments. Also, please consider a Substack paid subscription to help us bring even more meaningful content and connection points to you and our creator community. Here you will find articles and news, as well as the podcast and additional content. We cannot grow without you. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon. This episode was brought to you by Struktur Society, the community for creators in art, design, and music. For almost a decade, Struktur has brought together creatives from across the industrial, apparel, graphic, and sound design industries, building professional relationships, creating a platform for knowledge sharing, and raising the bar of product creation. From live events and workshops to publication and podcasting, Struktur continues to evolve to build the strong creator community needed to craft our future. Find us at struktursociety.com and subscribe to our Substack at struktursociety.substack.com.